There's a real mixed bag of departures for this episode of Famidaily. Daiku no Gensan 2 is the final game from two titans of the Famicom. One, well, I'm not going to say beloved, but let's say respected. And the other, well, no one's going to be sorry to see them go. Irem got off to a really rocky start. Although their version of Spelunker is considered to be one of the key cultural touchstones of mid-80s Japan. It's one of the defining games on the Famicom for many people. In time, their quality improved, but they never really seemed to make anything top tier. Their premiere series on the system was Daiku no Gensan, and that came about very late in the system's library. The thing Irem might be best known for are how their early Famicom carts had an LED light built into them. It's the only way that you could tell that your system was turned on. Daiku no Gensan 2 was developed by Micronics, and fortunately this is their last Famicom game. They were a contract developer, quietly doing work behind the scenes for publishers, and creating some of the worst arcade ports that the Famicom would see. Particularly infamous were their ports of Capcom arcade games. But they did so much more damage than that. For SNK's games, they left hard-coded disk system load times in for cartridge games. I thought about letting the video sit on one of these loading screens for old time's sake, but that's kinda boring. Micronics' output slowed way down over time, and they took a 3-year gap between development projects for the Famicom, returning in 1993 to make 2 games for Irem. And Micronics doesn't last much longer either. They only make 2 more games after this. Or at least, 2 more games that we know of. Daiku no Gensan 2 is a platformer very much in the style of the first Gensan game. Only it's worse. The plot involves a mad scientist kidnapping Gen's girlfriend, and Gen's rival gets involved by trying to stop Gen from rescuing her. On most of the stages, A will jump and B will swing Gen's hammer. By pressing up, you can stick the hammer out above you and hit enemies that way, and if you jump and then press down and B at the right time, you'll slam the hammer into the ground, which will make enemies bounce. And if you have perfect timing with that ground slam, then it also releases a shockwave. Enemies tend to come out in a steady stream, and of course if anything touches you, you'll take a point of damage. You start with a maximum of 4 health, but you only have 3 health. You can find an item that will heal you 1 heart, at exactly 1 place in the game. That would be this heart here, and it goes into your stored item slot. You activate items there by hitting select, and you can get a clock that will slow time, and an amulet that will destroy all enemies on the screen. There are also items you can collect that are indefinite power-ups. They'll stay with you unless you collect something that goes in that slot. There are 2 different hammer power-ups. One of them will make the hammer spin in a full circle when you swing it. This is by far the best power-up to collect. It increases Gen's effectiveness a lot. The only downside with the circle swing is that you can't do any floor slams with the hammer. The giant hammer increases the amount of damage that Gen does with every swing, but there's very few things that you hit that require more than 1 hammer swing. Mainly it'll affect bosses. The hard hat power-up lets you take an extra hit, and that one's a lot more common than the health pickup. Finally, there's the shoes power-up that makes you jump higher, and that's found on 1 stage. The stage design in Daiku no Gensan 2 is really awful. The best it gets is boring. The worst it gets is buggy. Watch what happens when I go off this conveyor belt. That's the most obvious and egregious problem, but the game is filled with little issues like that, and it just makes it feel bad to play. The bosses aren't much better since they have small weak points and big attacks. It's not that the patterns are difficult, it's that executing them requires a lot of precision, and it's not much fun. The worst of them might be this boss where you have to hit the wrecking ball back. It is literally a 1-frame window where you can hit the ball, and then it will fly back and hit the boss. Too soon or too late, and the ball misses them. Almost as bad as this boss, where you have to hammer them backward, and then use the ground slam to bounce them up into the crusher. Anytime you approach them, they'll throw you into the crusher instead, and so you have to do some very precise jump attacks to affect them and not get hurt. But there's more. Stages 6 and 7 at Daiku no Gensan are shoot-em-ups. some of the slowest, least engaging shoot-em-ups that you'll ever play. If you shoot down certain box enemies, they'll drop a weapon that you'll use with alternate fire. B will do your regular attack, and A will fire the weapon you picked up. There's another gun that fires straight ahead, a gun that fires a spread, and one that drops bombs. The hammer attack in the shoot-em-up stage is especially bad. You can only have one out at a time, it moves slow, and it loops back at you. Fortunately, there's hardly any enemies, and they're easy to avoid. There is a shoot-em-up boss at the end of Stage 6, but at the end of Stage 7, it's just a situation where you have to dodge falling objects for a while. After some stages, you'll have a bonus stage. Every bonus stage looks different, but they're really all the same. You just have to hit whatever appears, and you get a usable item based on how many enemies you hit. It's not especially thrilling, and the item that you get isn't especially useful. You have 3 lives in Daiku no Gensan, but you can continue as many times as you like. If you're still having trouble though, there's a cheat code to let you skip ahead. Enter this code on the title screen, and then when you start the game hit B to switch levels. Daiku no Gensan 2 seems to be the overlooked entry in the series. Not a lot of fans in Japan, as you'd expect from a game released this late, but the series kept going over to the Super Famicom. Unfortunately, Gensan suffered the fate of many Japanese video game franchises. He now solely exists as Pachi slot machines. This is not a good game. Every time the game starts to appear interesting, it kneecaps itself with terrible execution. I'm bothered by so many things here, like how enemies spawn and attack, how the platforming is just a little bit off, how the bosses are more frustrating than exciting. Regardless of anything else, Daiku no Gensan 2 shows us that Micronics was true to themselves to the very end.